Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep. I can't tell where to find it. Go! Leave them alone and they'll come home. I'm bringing their tails behind them.
Hi, my name is Tamara Laschek, and you're listening to the Bo Peep Podcast, where men are women, women are men, and the sheep are confused. Now let's see if we can make sense of this crazy world. Hey, Jim. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to our conversation. Money is one of my favorite topics, as you know, with my 26-year background in finance. And I know that you are an expert on this topic, whether you think so or not. A
reluctant expert.
I knew you were going to cut me off with something snarky, so I preempted. But why don't you tell everyone what your background is and your bona fide is, so we know, who you are and why you're credible in this space.
A long time ago, it was 42 years ago, I got a doctorate in statistics. Now, some people think that that's for learning how to use a calculator. No, it's probability and statistics. It's called more formally mathematical statistics. And a lot of different methods that I learned to use in a competent manner. I had a quality control position for 4 years. Then I had a marketing research position for 9 years. Those are two big areas of statistical practice. Mm-hmm. I landed at Staples a couple of years later, did some private consulting. And so I got a chance to do sales analysis, forecasting, and it was really quite interesting. So with quality control, marketing research, and sales analysis, I covered the three primary areas of statistical consulting practice. A lot of things changed after 9/11 in the economy, and no need to delineate, but a lot of different disruptions. And I took a job in a marketing research firm. And when I was there, I started writing about gold and the economy and economic statistics and the central banks and their policies called monetary policy. Mm-hmm. And then I got invited to be a speaker at a conference, and that coincided with starting a newsletter. But over the years I built up the newsletter, I had a hobby, and I still do, movies. I must have seen Godfather 20 times.
My favorites.
But the reason I bring up The Godfather was that I realized that the mafia had an extension, and it's called Wall Street. And I concluded Wall Street was a criminal mafia organization in finance. And I also concluded, Tamara, that it would be a matter of time before they took over the US government. And that's what 9/11 was. It was a lot of things, but one thing it was a government takeover. And right about the time of starting my newsletter, I had been aware of the government shadow statistics. And there are three government statistics I concluded were all fraudulent: the jobless rate, the price inflation, and the GDP, economic size. For job statistics, jobless rate, we don't count people who lost their insurance. How stupid. So it's always wrong. In fact, if you take the participation rate and go 1 minus that, you get a good idea of what the unemployment rate is. It's about 25%. Now, I know that's hard for a lot of good people to swallow, but it's about 22 to 28%. And it's been in the upper teens for as long as I've had the newsletter. Then you go to price inflation, CPIs, and they're all different. Mm-hmm. And naturally, the old ones were a lot higher. And you give credit to Robert Rubin for his falsification. A brilliant man, but he's part of the Wall Street mafia. Okay, so they would do things like substitution. Oh my gosh, the price of beef is going up. Let's put chicken in there instead because it's got a lower price. But Rubin did something brilliant that only mathematicians have a good appreciation of. He didn't take the arithmetic average, where you add them all up and divide by whatever, add 20 items up, divide by 20. What he did was he multiplied them all together, and they took the 20th root. What he did was he used the geometric mean. And the geometric mean has a very unusual characteristic. If one item is way high, it has a very small effect on the geometric mean. Was that something that Congress approved by asking university professors what the effect was? No, he just did it because he's a mafia don working in Wall Street.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not just substitutions, it's deleting items. There's something called seasonality. They abuse seasonality. I got to tell you something. When I was at Staples, I had complete authority over the seasonality adjustments. That was one of my jobs. I learned how you abuse the seasonality, and we abused it in the U.S. government Bureau of Labor Statistics. We abuse it heavily. What we do is, when I was told to do a seasonal adjustment, alteration, update, it was because 2 or 3 years had passed. Now what we do is 2 months pass, and the government does seasonality adjustment, alteration, because everything changed with the lockdown. Gosh, unbelievable things happened. But way before the lockdown, they were using seasonal adjustments, and they'd alter them in order to get the answers they wanted. The screwball methods of abusing statistics with seasonal adjustments, substitutions, deletions. Oh, that's a bad one there. Let's remove that component and put a different one in, and we'll call it updating the series.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Okay.
And this is precisely why I wanted to talk to you. One of the jobs that I had, I worked as a COO in investment banking. We used to take league table data, and you know how league table data, like everything you talk about, can be cut certain different ways in order to always make you look like your firm is number one. That was my first introduction to how data is manipulated. And then as we saw throughout COVID with this various narrative of, inflation's transitory, and then this is the revised data, there's a narrative that gets put out. It's based on some data, but manipulated, to support the narrative. And then months later, there's a revision too, in order to let out some of the data. And bottom line is the public's being lied to. And you're somebody who looks at the numbers. Numbers don't lie when you actually look at them in, you have the complete set of numbers. And I wanted to be able to, show people where the narrative disagrees with the reality of the numbers. And you brought up 3 things, the last one being GDP, which you haven't gotten to, but the CPI and jobless, 2 numbers that were just released, right? So
they're utter bullshit. It's hilarious. I mean, it's a comedy.
So what were the numbers and what was the reality? Like, did you do that analysis or?
Remember, I'm in my 20th year of the newsletter. So after about 7 or 10 years, I stopped looking at the nonsense.
Okay.
There's no need for me to look at the CPI that they come out with and tear it apart when I did it for the first 7 years. But I got to admit, when we had the lockdown, it was a disruption to the supply chain. So when they said that the official, the doctored CPI went up to 7%, I looked to see what John Williams had, and he was posting 19 to 21%. Then you get the argument that it's transitory. And I asked the question in response, has the supply chain been totally rejuvenated and reconstructed? And the answer is no. So transitory, schmansitory, bunch of bullshit. Okay, let me give you the quick version of part 3 with the GDP, the gross domestic product, the economic size. When you lie about price inflation, you therefore lie about the GDP, economic size, and growth. If you lie by 5% about price inflation, you lie by economic growth by 5% equally, except, Tamara, it's even worse. They've got what they call the deflator, the GDP deflator, and it's even lower than, I'm amused by all this. It's even lower than the CPI. So they lie about economic growth even more than they lie about the price inflation. I made headlines in the conferences back in 05, 6, and 7 by showing what the real economic growth was when you use real, true economic statistic. And now they've altered the word real. The word real means adjusted for inflation by their fraudulent amount. So I say true. If you look at the true GDP by using a true CPI, we've had between a -5 and a -12% recession for 20 consecutive years.
Wow.
Okay. There was a guy named Chapman. This was about 7 years ago. He came out with a Chapman CPI. It was 500 items in a basket that included services like having your septic tank cleaned or having a plumber, do something in your kitchen, carpenters, that kind of service, roofers, all kinds of services. But he also had price of apple, price of bread, milk, cheese. I personally look at yogurt, milk, and eggs. I actually don't eat bread.
And good that you don't eat bread, because I tried to buy a loaf and it was $18 the other day. So good thing you're not eating bread.
Well, I'm sure glad that this inflation is transitory.
Yes.
Chapman CPI, it was about 2014. He made the statement, the biggest cities, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, they have 10 to 11% CPI. This was 2014, before any of the COVID bullshit. And he said in the other cities across the country and the smaller towns, it's between 6 and 8%. So he made a conclusion. He said, what does this all mean? I love that question. What does this all mean? Because that's where the rubber meets the road. He said, we've got a 20% smaller economy than we did in 2001. We've been lying about inflation, therefore we lie about economic growth. By lying about inflation, they get to pay out a smaller amount for Social Security. I've been collecting Social Security now for 3 or 4 years. And I'm telling you, it's a lot bigger now than it was at the beginning, but it didn't go up 17% last year. They raised it about 5% and made a big deal out of it, but it should have gone up 17%. I'm a statistical analyst. I regard most statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to be absolute nonsense. But I look for aberrations, Tamara. And here's an aberration that is a lulu. There are wars going on, Tamara, over gold troves. I call them a trove if they're over 20,000 tons. The war is being fought to capture the gold troves. Because if you don't have gold behind your currency and payment system soon, you're going to be blocked out and excluded from global trade. And that is where the United States faces its biggest current threat.
Yeah. So let's go down that path and talk about that. So I've been talking about the de-dollarization of our currency. People said that I'm insane. It's never going to happen. And we're really on the brink. In order to have our currency be replaced, there has to be a sovereign bond market to support it. That hasn't yet happened. You have a number of the countries, the BRICS countries in particular, looking to create a currency backed by gold. And you definitely have some other countries that are predatory nations trying to kick the US off its perch as prime reserve. What's really going on, and how will this unfold over the next few months and years that you see?
Wow, that's a tough question.
Do you think the US, first of all, let's start this. Do you think the US will be kicked off its prime reserve currency?
It already happened.
Okay.
When the entire Persian Gulf and OPEC follows them, that means Nigeria, Venezuela, etc.
Mm-hmm.
When the entire Persian Gulf goes to a Chinese yuan standard for payment on oil and gas, and by the way, France, this is not a new story. This happened in April. France bought from UAE. France bought liquefied natural gas, a big multi-year contract from the United Arab Emirates, and it is in Chinese yuan.
Mm-hmm.
That's a European NATO nation, has a Chinese yuan payments contract for Persian Gulf natural gas. Unbelievable. If I had told you that 5 years ago, you would have laughed in my face and you would have kicked me out of the room. Okay. Now, I think we're going to see the BRICS nations come up with something, but let me focus on the dollar for a minute as a preface. Our bond market has no bidders now. We've gone no bid on the treasuries, and we're doing almost 100% monetization, which is what got Chile and Zimbabwe in a heap of trouble. Monetizing your own debt is what a third world nation does, and that's what the United States is fast becoming by its actions. We don't have a bond that is now regarded as legitimate payment in Long Beach. Long Beach, California, we're told has a labor strike. That is a lie. Who's telling you the lie? It's the controller of the press. Who's the controller of the press? It's Langley. What's their main business? Narcotics. So the narcotics element of the US government is telling us that Long Beach, which has its suppliers refuse the Treasury bill, that they have now a labor strike, which is bullshit. Why did it take so long for the debt ceiling debate to get settled? Could it have been because we're already in debt default?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have we already defaulted?
In May, one of the holders of a lot of Treasury bonds was being given 40 cents on the dollar for redemption. I think it was a story that got slammed shut immediately.
Yeah.
Because the last thing the United States government wants to hear is news reports out there with examples of bond haircuts. And that's what it's a manifestation of a bond default. Okay. We've got a problem with the dollar. We've got insolvent banks. We call them now zombie banks. Okay. I'm going to get to the BRICS in a minute, but
yeah,
you've got to get the
no. The zombie
here.
banks are important because the narrative of the mainstream, and I listened to Jamie Dimon talking about the, some concerns from the banks because they're such big holders of commercial real estate in their portfolio. We know
and treasuries, leverage
what's
treasuries
happening there, but he thought that it's going to be, one-off, and we're almost past.
Oh, it'll be transitory. This dollar debt,
exactly.
Yeah.
It'll be transitory.
Transitory. Yeah.
He had deflected to the regional banks, didn't talk about the big banks, which have problems as well.
They have bigger problems because they have bigger portfolios of derivatives. Okay, what is a zombie bank? If a bank cannot pay out its bonds, and you're better at this than I am, but I'm going to give you my best shot. If a bank cannot pay out on its bonds, on its preferred stock dividends, and other obligations regarding loans based on its cash flow, then it has to borrow money to pay off its obligations for debt. And that qualifies it as a zombie bank. What we have now, and I find it fascinating that JP Morgan was acquiring the dead banks. They were saying that First Republic was insolvent and in a failure. They said Silicon Valley was insolvent and in a failure. And there was another one, Silvergate, insolvent and in a failure. But then it begs the question, what is insolvent? Okay, a bank is insolvent if its assets are not greater than its liabilities. And here's where it gets interesting and can be subjected to corruption. What happens if they take all their assets and don't properly market to market and market, say, to book or market to maturity? If they don't factor in the losses that their leveraged bonds are experiencing, then they're insolvent without admitting it. I think it was the Dodd-Frank Financial Regulatory Bill. It actually made it legal if you're a systemically important bank to falsify your accounting. It's okay.
Well, even before that came out, if you remember the tail end of the financial during the financial crisis, all the U.S. banks had to take an infusion of, say, I think it was like 25 billion each, which they all paid back with interest. But the interesting thing was Deutsche Bank, which is the biggest bank in Germany, managed to make it through the financial crisis unscathed. I did work at Deutsche Bank, as you know, sat behind the mortgage traders and analysts and talked to them about how is it possible? And he said it's simple. So that's how a firm like Deutsche Bank could make it through the financial crisis without taking a capital infusion from Germany, which denied to give them a capital infusion. So how do you rectify that?
You don't do proper mark to market. There's a consequence, though. I was talking about the U.S. bad situation regarding the dollar with the banks, the bonds, and the government debt. We're accumulating another $1 trillion every 5 to 6 months.
Yep.
We're doing false accounting. We're saying that the deficit is less because they're one-off items. But the one-off items seem to repeat, which defies the description of one-off. Furthermore, if you look at the actual government total debt over the last 3 years, it's much more than the deficit added up on each of those 4 years. In other words, we're lying about the deficit, lying through our teeth. That's all we ever do. We lie. The US dollar structure is teetering. It's hollow, and now it is on the verge of being rejected and isolated on a mass scale that is going to affect imports into the United States. If we cannot pay with our toilet paper that we call treasury bills, if we cannot pay for a ship loaded with products, then we're not going to get the products, and we're going to start to depend on a black market through Mexico and Canada for, say, Toyota parts, okay, Hyundai parts. Just think about that. The United States doesn't make motorcycles. They're made in Japan, Korea, and China. We don't make a lot of things. Okay, so the BRICS, this is what I'm leading to. The BRICS have this opportunity. Their lit match, their lit fuse was the first Ukraine war. And
let me just explain to people, BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, correct?
Yes. And now there's a second I, because a week ago, Iran was inducted formally. It's now double I. Soon it'll be double S with Saudi Arabia being formally inducted. Why would Iran and Saudi be formally inducted? Because they want to capture the standard for energy payments. The BRICS nations do not want to have the dollar anywhere in their payment system. Now, you talked about the global currency reserve, the dollar, and I'm going to get to that because there's a very big climax crescendo coming. France now is buying Persian Gulf energy, paying in yuan. A lot of countries now are buying Saudi and UAE and Iran all along, oil and gas, and paying for it in yuan. This is the goal of the BRICS, to remove the dollar, because we have weaponized the dollar. If a country doesn't want to use the dollar and they're really anti-Washington, like, say, Venezuela, we destroy the nation by attacking their currency, where a cup of coffee just went up 150-fold in price in Caracas. So the BRICS are producing a system that's not dollar-based for managing trade. They're focusing on trade, but trade is very closely aligned with, say, major projects like in Brazil, a port and a refinery nearby, and you got Iran and China involved. So it's a 3-country contract, and they've got to make quarterly payments for cement, for labor, for, services, for connecting with chemical engineers, all kinds of different things. So I call it trade payment and contract payment. Now, here's the crescendo point. If nations, even like France, are going to be paying for energy, which is the biggest commodity entry on the ledger, then they're likely to pay for other things like lumber, like coal, which is kind of energy, like agricultural products. We now are in a situation where Argentina and China are using yuan in agricultural output payments. Argentina, Brazil's next. If a nation and its economy are not going to use the dollar for oil and other major commodities, they're not going to be using treasury bonds in their banking system, and they're not going to be buying the treasury bonds. So the United States is going to be stuck with a $2 trillion annual deficit and no buyers to support and fund that deficit, which is turned into a security called the treasury bond. Securitization of the deficit is called the treasury bond creation. And we're having failed auctions. We're having canceled auctions. We're having delayed auctions. We're not successful in our treasury auctions. I think we're going to have a first casualty, Tamara, in primary bond dealers who are obligated by contract to buy what's not bought at a treasury auction. It's going to be deadly. Primary bond dealers, and they're going to get some quick, very quick help from the Fed, which now is an extension of the Department of Treasury and is not independent. Get it through your heads.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it's ever really been independent. Let's move over to gold. So we have these BRICS countries that are creating some type of currency that is going to be gold backed. Yet the price of gold is being very controlled. Like all the people that are buying gold, you would think the price of gold would go through the roof. Talk to us about the price of gold and how it stays where it is. What's going on behind the scenes there, which I know is another lie, but shed some light on this for me.
They're using naked shorting in the Comex market, and they're not doing anything about that fraudulent practice. Remember, naked shorting, okay, just imagine that I'm here and I decide that I'm going to short the television set market. I'm going to sell a contract and I'm going to drive the price down, but I don't have any television sets. Or I'm going to short the television market and drive down the price. Mm-hmm. Well, I would get thrown in prison for it, unless it's for a competitive currency to the dollar. What we're going to see, Tamara, is the BRICS nations create a gold token for their payment systems, and it's going to pull the rug out from the entire Forex group of currencies. Right now, there are no buyers for any G7 sovereign nation bonds. There are no buyers. Mm-hmm. They're all monetizing their debt, and we're going to get an explosion. And here's how I think it's going to play out. We're going to see the Comex report that they're having problem with delivery. They already announced that in June. They announced they had problems with deliveries. They also announced that they're having bigger problems for July delivery. And the delivery is
the delivery of gold or all.
Yes, yeah, gold. Okay. Gold. Yes, sorry. Now, when I say the June deliveries, I mean delivered in July. When I say July deliveries, I mean in August. They're having 30 times as much demand to deliver gold on June contracts as they have in the Comex vaults. I think we're very close to a Comex default. Now, remember, I said that we got a Treasury bond default. Hand in hand is a Comex default. I think we're going to get a bullshit story like a labor strike, or there's, oh my gosh, there's a pandemic in the Comex. All the workers are sick. They've got coronavirus. Okay, we're likely to hear a bullshit story coming out of Comex.
So we get a false flag. Okay.
We're going to get a false. Okay. I think what's coming, and I don't think it's like 6 months from now. I think it's soon. Nobody is enforcing from the Commodity Futures Trading Commission the naked shorting in gold and silver. Nobody. Okay, the BRICS are very open. They say we're going to produce a system, create a system, design and implement a system that does not have paper gold involved. It'll have real gold. Okay, so New York, London, and Chicago, I think are going to go dark with respect to the gold market. I think they're going to report no gold price. I think they're going to say we cannot do the delivery. They're going to lie and say we've done the delivery. Then you're going to get the reports that they've not done the delivery. They deal in lies, fraud, and pressure. They're trying to get cash delivery, cash settlement, and not delivery of metal for the June contracts. And people are smelling blood.
Okay.
They're asking for the metal because it's 30 times as much metal demanded in contracts. What's a contract? A contract for gold is a contract. And a contract means it's enforceable by the courts. But you're going to get a ruling on some of these cases. And for national security, it's going to get a pass. Now, remember, the BRICS are over 80% of the global GDP. They're about 85% of the global population because they include India and China.
Yep.
And that's over 1 billion in each country. The BRICS that are going to produce a system, install, use, implement a system, and they're not going to tell us about it. They certainly did not at the St. Petersburg May 23rd meeting. We were told about $47 billion of contracts that were signed by 23 nations. It's now the biggest economic forum on the planet, and Davos is nothing but an effing barbecue. Here's what I think is going to happen. They're going to implement their gold token method. It's not going to be a currency. It's not going to have a bond next to it, not going to have interest rate next to it, not going to trade on the Forex. It's going to be a gold-backed token. If you're looking for an example, look at lowly Zimbabwe. They launched in, I think it was April or so, a gold-backed token that you can deposit in a bank, but is not a currency. It's a token. Think of it as a crypto that acts like something you can put in your bank account. Okay, it's a hybrid. I think we're going to see pairs of BRICS nations emerging that use the BRICS gold token. And they're not going to be on Reuters News, AP, UPI, or Bloomberg. And you're going to hear about it through the grapevine. Because if they announce it and give away its inner workings, they're going to get sabotaged, they're going to be defrauded, they're going to get hacked. So they're going to do it quietly because the Wall Street mafia and the Department of Treasury that they control have shown their methods, the MO, modus operandi. So the BRICS are going to be quiet and do it behind closed doors. Why should they tell the country they're trying to isolate what they're doing?
But it's being reported on publicly.
And I guarantee you they're talking about it much less in terms of threatening to kill the United States economy and financial structures. The BRICS and their plans are basically a US dollar and US economy killer. And it's going to expose the derivatives, which we've never talked about. We had not talked about up to now. And the entire rug falls out from under all the Forex currencies and gold goes up. This is how gold goes up.
Yeah.
You cannot have gold going up, Tamara, without the dollar being tarnished in a mortal wound.
I completely agree. And I imagine the BRICS nations are okay with these naked shorts because it's keeping the gold price low enough as they buy more and more and more.
That's probably true. But let me get to my zinger point.
Okay.
As these dozens of nations dump their tens and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of treasury bonds, they've got to get lapped up by the Fed. The Fed is going to become a bad bank. For many people, I think you know what a bad bank is, but many people don't. A bad bank is like an accounting category within a financial institution where you put all your garbage.
Yeah.
Therefore, the Fed is going to see its balance sheet double and triple. It's going to be like the tick on a dog's ear. The Fed is going to become itself the bad bank for the U.S. government, grabbing what France sells, what Qatar sells, what South Korea sells for treasury bonds. Who's going to buy them? How are they going to be redeemed? They have to be redeemed or you get publicity that the treasury bonds has defaulted. They're going to buy them up. They're going to lap them up and they put them in the bad bank of the Fed on their balance sheet. Their whole balance sheet, which zoomed up from like 3 trillion to 9 trillion in the last several years, it might go to 20 trillion. Okay. There's another piece to this. United Arab Emirates has volunteered as the BRICS agent for dumping treasuries. They've also got the dirham. The dirham is pegged to the dollar. So they have volunteered to be the dumping ground for BRICS nations dumping the treasury bonds, and they might get dirham in return. And then the Treasury and Fed must honor the dirham and must accept them and convert with UAE to give them gold. We're going to be pressured as a nation to give up our gold, or we become a rogue nation with no imports. That's the risk we have.
Okay, let me bring it down to this small retail investor who has been buying gold because this is what is being talked about as a hedge to inflation and de-dollarization. Is there a possibility that the government does what it did under Roosevelt and confiscate people's gold?
No, there's no risk at all, and I hope they try.
Okay.
This is not 1935. It's a great investment, and you might have to sell it outside the United States to get your money and to make your payday. Okay, something is coming that's going to knock the U.S. flat on its ass. It's going to be the coming out party of the BRICS. I've got another forecast. It's coming into form that the big banks are going to be the beneficiary of a force majeure on their gold and silver naked shorts that are loading up on gold and silver and going long, including their executives and private accounts. They're going long, and they're bargaining now to do a force majeure to get out from under all their naked shorts so they can declare that they're long, and they're going to promote 10,000 gold and 400 silver. That's next. Who will give Wall Street the force majeure on gold and silver? It will be Wall Street that gives Wall Street the force majeure. It'll be the U.S. government controlled by Wall Street. And after that, Comex goes dark. We're in negotiations right now, Tamara, as a U.S. government to join the BRICS. And they're not going to tell you about it. They want a multipolar financial system. And that goes directly against New York, London, which is the unipolar system. New York, London, Basel, Switzerland. United States, England, Switzerland.
Yeah.
The 3-point triumvirate of corrupt financial operations.
Right.
Okay. It's going to be exciting. We're going to see multiple places for a gold price, and it's going to be higher than the Comex. So the Comex had better shut down. And during all that, they can't make their deliveries.
Okay.
So we're going to see a false flag.
Could happen. Is this going to be what drives a complete collapse of the stock market? Or how's that going to play itself out, you think?
I wish I knew. Back in the summer of 2020, with this lockdown nonsense, I said it's going to be really interesting how they support the stock market, because the stock market should collapse.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't collapse for an economic lockdown, it'll never collapse. It didn't happen. Why? What happened? What interceded? And I know what interceded. It was called the COVID stimulus bill with 18 months of secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
And a total of $9 trillion to the big banks. So
Mm-hmm.
they supported the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the time is up on that. And now I ask a new question. What's supporting it now if the COVID stimulus did then? And I think I know the answer. It's just printing money.
Yeah.
We're printing money.
And another stimulus. I mean,
Tamara,
there's more money flooding the market.
If we print money to support the government debt, we're going to print money to support the stock market because we want to try to avoid a revolution.
100%.
Okay. We're printing money to support the stock market.
100%. You talked about the 7 vectors. Can you do that in just 5 minutes? Give a summary of your 7 vectors, because I think it aligns with some of the collapse that I am seeing. So tell me what you think.
Okay. I told you that the big banks is one vector that seems to be collapsing. The Biden show and the treason is another vector that's collapsing. The BRICS and their non-dollar is another that's collapsing. And there's really a fourth that's kind of ethereal, and it's awareness. Americans' awareness is really amplifying now with respect to the lockdown, fraudulent, and maybe with the vulnerability of the banks. There's a lot of money exiting banks, got to be over 3 trillion exiting the bank. Okay, the vectors. Okay, so that's another vector. And vice presidents are being replaced in CNN. And buyout of Fox is being entertained right now. Okay, so that's another vector that's running out of time.
Same with ABC. I think Bob Iger said that he would consider selling ABC the other day at a conference.
And he gave us a bullshit story. He said it's not central to our business. Oh, really? Oh, hey, I got news for you, Iger. Disney's going to the shitter. Their theme park is going to the shitter.
I saw some of that data.
Okay, it's not just distrust for security of your children. It's also, we don't want to travel and we don't have a lot of extra money. Okay, there's another vector. This is a new vector for me that I will, develop a little bit in the July report that is going to get starting up really soon. It's what I call the food vector. The vectors, they're not all equal in their power for producing a collapse. The vector that has the most hidden and subtle power is the news networks. The media has the power to crush this entire system. And the system is the Biden show with its Rockefeller energy policy and its Obama domestic policy. I haven't been giving a whole lot of attention to the hidden vector, the psychological power where the people just kind of overnight dismiss the press. They dismiss the formal press and they begin to realize, holy shit, I can't believe it. I've got my entire life savings in dollar. What do I do? I got my mutual funds in the dollar. What do I do? For the more physical, tectonic vectors, it's the dollar, it's the Biden show treason, and it's the BRICS. They together have the ability to bring down the U.S. government. I am a patriot, Tamara, and I believe the only way we make progress is if this entire Biden show is canceled and the entire cast of characters is given a pink slip.
That's a perfect way to end this. Jim, thank you. This was so interesting, and I really appreciate your insight and your expertise. And how can people find you if they want to subscribe to your newsletter and such?
The best way to support my work is to sign up for my newsletter. It's golden-jackass.com. I know you've got a much more, let's just say, polite and mature audience than some of the other alternative types. My mother, when I was a little kid, called me my little jackass. I called myself the Golden Jackass. I thought it would be a catchy name. It's caused some minor, very, very minor problems, but like for spam filters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So, all right.
Golden-jackass.com.
Perfect.
Sign up for the newsletter. The subscribe button is in yellow right in the center. Sign up for a consult. And if you're wealthy and you want to support my work and keep me going, hit the sponsor button. Someone just did yesterday.
All right. Let's end it right there.